Under the yellow glow of the diner's lights, Emily moved from table to table with a smile that looked soft and practiced. She poured coffee into chipped cups, balanced trays heavy with plates, and nodded politely to customers who barely noticed her face. For most people, she was just the waitress, a quiet young woman who worked long hours. Day after day, she served breakfast to farmers, lunch to office clerks, and late-night dinners to travelers passing through town. No one asked her what she wanted from life. No one cared what her dreams were. To them, she was only a background figure, someone whose presence mattered only when their glass was empty or their food was late. But Emily carried something inside her that no one could see. Every smile she gave hid the pull of another world. Every step she took between tables carried the rhythm of silent music that played in her head. She had grown up loving sounds, tapping her fingers on tabletops, hearing songs in the rain against the windows. When she passed the piano at the old community hall, she always felt her chest tighten with longing. Yet no one in the diner could have guessed that behind her polite words and steady hands lived a girl who wanted nothing more than to make music. At the corner booth sat a man who never missed his evening meal. He wore a sharp suit, shiny shoes, and carried himself with the pride of someone who owned more than he would ever need. His name was Mr. Harlan, a wealthy businessman who invested in properties across the town. He was respected, feared, and envied, and he looked at the world as though he already knew everyone's place in it. When he saw Emily, he did not see a young woman with hidden dreams. He only saw a waitress who filled his glass with water and took his order without question. And in his eyes, that was all she would ever be. Emily noticed his looks, the way his eyes slid over her as if she was invisible. She heard the dismissive tone in his voice when he called for more coffee. He treated her not as a person, but as part of the furniture, something that existed to serve his comfort. Still, Emily never responded with anger. She simply smiled, carried on, and tucked her feelings away. But deep inside, each look of dismissal, each careless word, added to a quiet fire burning in her heart. The other waitresses sometimes whispered about him. They admired his expensive watch, his car parked outside, his habit of leaving just enough tip to appear generous but never enough to truly be. To them, he was proof that money made a person important. But to Emily, he was proof of something else, that the world judged quickly and harshly, that people could decide your worth before you even opened your mouth. She felt the weight of that judgment every night when she hung up her apron. And yet she also carried a secret defiance, a belief that she was not meant to stay invisible forever. The nights were the hardest. When the diner grew quiet and the sound of clinking glasses faded, Emily would wipe down tables, her hands moving automatically, while her mind wandered far from the walls around her. She imagined herself sitting at a piano, her fingers creating melodies that could silence a room. She imagined playing notes that could make even the coldest man pause. In her dreams, people listened, truly listened, and in those moments, she was not a waitress, she was an artist. Her uniform and tired feet disappeared, replaced by something brighter, something true. Mr. Harlan never knew any of this as he sat in his corner booth. He never guessed that the girl bringing him food was capable of more than serving. In his world, wealth and power defined talent. In his world, music was played in grand halls by people trained from birth. A waitress from a small-town diner could never belong to that stage. And so every time Emily passed his table, he looked through her, not at her, to him. She was fixed in her role, trapped in a story he thought he already understood. But Emily's story was not the one he imagined. The diner was only the beginning, only the surface of her life. She was not just carrying trays. She was carrying a dream stronger than her fatigue. She was not just moving from table to table. She was moving toward a hidden stage that no one else could see yet. Every sigh she hid, every thought she tucked away, was building into something greater, something that would one day break free. In those early days, no one believed in her, not the customers, not her co-workers, and certainly not the millionaire at the corner booth. But she believed in herself, quietly, stubbornly, in the silence of her heart. Her belief was not loud, it did not need applause. It only needed time, practice, and the courage to keep going. And though the world saw a waitress, though Mr. Harlan saw nothing at all, Emily was already becoming something more. The girl behind the uniform was waiting, and soon, the world would have no choice but to see her. When the last customer left the diner and the chairs were turned upside down on the tables, Emily tied her coat around herself and stepped into the night air. The streets were quiet. The only sound the hum of streetlights and the distant bark of a dog. Most people went home to rest after a long shift, but Emily's day was never finished. Her tired feet carried her not toward her small apartment, but toward the old community hall at the edge of town. It was a building that many people had forgotten. Its walls faded, its windows dusty, but to Emily, it was a treasure chest. Inside stood a piano, scratched and scarred by years of use. Its keys yellowed with age. To others it was junk, but to Emily it was alive. She pushed open the heavy door, and the smell of old wood and dust filled her lungs. The hall was dim, lit only by a single flickering bulb, but in the center the piano waited. Every night after work she sat on its worn bench, her uniform still smelling faintly of food and coffee. Her fingers hovered nervously over the keys, then pressed them one by one. The sound was uneven, sometimes harsh, but to her it was beautiful. Each note felt like a word she had been trying to say her whole life. The piano spoke for her, telling stories she couldn't share with anyone at the diner. At first her playing was clumsy. She had no teacher, no guide, no one to correct her when her fingers stumbled. She borrowed old sheet music from the library, tracing her finger along the notes and trying to make sense of them. Sometimes she would play a single line for hours until it felt right. Her hands ached, her shoulders tensed, but she never stopped when she made mistakes. She would laugh quietly to herself and start again. Each wrong note was not a failure, but a step toward something better. Music became her secret world. While others saw her only as a waitress, she saw herself transforming each night at the piano. It was like living a double life. By day she carried trays. By night she carried melodies. And even though no one heard her, even though no one clapped, she felt alive. The notes filled the empty hall, echoing off the walls as if the room itself was cheering her on. Sometimes she imagined an audience sitting in the dusty chairs. She pictured faces watching her, holding their breath as she played in her mind. She could almost hear the applause, feel the warmth of the spotlight. It was a dream, yes, but it was also a promise she made to herself. One day she would not play to empty walls. One day she would not be invisible. One day people would listen, but the world outside the hall did not understand. Her co-workers teased her when they found out she spent her nights at the piano. "Emily thinks she's going to be a star," they laughed. Some shook their heads, saying she was wasting her time, and when Mr. Harlan, the wealthy man from the diner, overheard the whispers, he smirked. To him it was ridiculous. The idea of a waitress touching greatness, he believed talent was something inherited, bought with money, polished in private schools. How could someone like her even dare to try? Emily heard the words, she saw the doubt in their eyes. But she carried on. If anything, their disbelief pushed her further. Every cruel laugh, every dismissive glance became fuel. She poured it all into the piano, turning their doubt into determination. She didn't have money, but she had hunger. She didn't have teachers, but she had persistence. And persistence, she knew, could carve a path even through stone. Night after night she practiced. Her fingers began to grow stronger, her movements more certain slowly. The awkward sounds turned into music. Her mistakes grew fewer. Her confidence grew deeper. Sometimes, as the first light of dawn crept through the windows, she would finally rise from the bench, exhausted but smiling. She would walk home with her head held high, carrying the music inside her like a secret flame. The world might still see her as a waitress, but she knew she was becoming more in those quiet hours. Emily discovered something important. The piano was not just an instrument, it was a mirror. It reflected her patience, her effort, her will to keep going even when no one believed in her. Every time she pressed a key, she was proving to herself that she could learn, that she could grow. She was proving that the limits others placed on her were not her true limits. And as her music slowly took shape, so did her courage. It was not perfect, not yet. But perfection was not the goal. The goal was to keep moving, to keep playing, to keep believing. When she finally walked into the diner each morning, tired but glowing with quiet pride, no one noticed the change. They saw the same apron, the same polite smile, the same girl serving coffee. But Emily knew the truth. She was no longer only a waitress, she was a pianist in the making. She was a dreamer who refused to wake up. And though the world had yet to hear her music, though Mr. Harlan still looked down on her, the day would come when her hidden world would break open. And when that day came, the same people who laughed would have no choice but to listen. One evening at the diner, the chatter of coworkers filled the air while Emily quietly wiped down a counter. She didn't notice at first that her name had slipped into their conversation. Two of the waitresses were giggling, telling a customer that Emily spent her nights playing the old piano at the community hall. Their voices carried across the room louder than they realized. Laughter followed, the kind that stings, the kind that makes a person feel small. Emily kept her head down, pretending not to hear, though every word landed heavy in her chest. At the corner booth, Mr. Harlan raised his eyebrows as the gossip reached him. He set down his silver spoon with a sharp clink against the saucer and leaned back, listening. When the waitress said, "She thinks she can play like a real musician someday," his lips curled into a smirk. It was the kind of smile that came not from kindness, but from disbelief. He let out a short laugh, low and dismissive, and called across the room. "Some people don't know their place," he said, his voice smooth but edged with mockery. The other waitresses glanced at him, then back at Emily, and their giggles only grew. The words hung in the air like smoke, choking Emily, though she said nothing. In that moment, Emily felt exposed. Her secret world, the one she built late at night with trembling fingers on broken keys, was suddenly dragged into the harsh light. The piano was her escape, her dream, something pure, and now it was reduced to a joke, a story told for entertainment during a slow evening at the diner. Her cheeks burned, but she did not look up. Instead, she finished wiping the counter and walked into the kitchen, her movements steady, though her heart trembled. "Mr. Harlan watched her leave with the same cold amusement he wore whenever he looked at people he believed were beneath him. To him, music was not something anyone could simply decide to learn. In his mind, greatness came from wealth, from access to teachers, grand halls, and polished instruments. What could a tired waitress with no formal training possibly hope to achieve? His smirk said it all. Dreams like hers were foolish, a waste of time, and as far as he was concerned, her place was in the diner, not on a stage. That night, Emily walked home with her head bowed. The street felt lonelier than usual, and for the first time in weeks, she wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe the others knew better. Maybe she was chasing something that was never meant for her. She imagined their laughter echoing in the empty hall where she usually practiced. She imagined Mr. Harlan's smirk following her every note. Doubt dug its claws deep into her heart, whispering that her dream was foolish. She wanted to turn away from the path she had chosen, to give up before the world had another chance to laugh at her. But when she reached the community hall, she paused outside the door. Her hands trembled as she held the key. Her mind battling with itself, she almost turned away. But then she remembered the way the piano sounded when her fingers landed just right. She remembered how alive she felt when music filled the empty space inside the hall. No one laughed. No one mocked her. There she was, free, with a deep breath. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. She sat at the bench, her reflection faintly visible in the dark, polished wood of the piano. For a moment she just stared at the keys. Her heart was heavy, her mind replaying the cruel words. But then she pressed a single note and the sound lingered, soft but sure. It reminded her why she was here, why she couldn't stop. Every note she played was hers, not theirs. Every mistake she made was a step forward, not proof of failure. Slowly, she let the music wash away the doubt. Her fingers began to move, clumsy at first, then steady. The hall filled with sound, not laughter, not mockery. But her truth, back at the diner, the gossip faded quickly. To the others, it had been nothing more than a joke told in passing. But for Emily, it had been a storm she had to walk through. And though it hurt, it also gave her something she had not felt before: defiance. If they doubted her, if Mr. Harlan smirked at her, she would make them see. She would not quit just because they expected her to. She would prove that greatness was not born from money or privilege. It could be born from late nights, tired hands, and the refusal to stop trying. Mr. Harlan, however, did not think about her again. In his mind, she was already forgotten, just another waitress reaching too high. But what he didn't know was that his words had planted something inside Emily. Not despair, but determination. His doubt would become the shadow she fought against, and one day, when she stood before him with the piano as her weapon, that shadow would break. But until then, Emily carried his smirk in her memory, not as a wound, but as fuel. The very doubt meant to destroy her would one day drive her to rise higher than anyone expected. The first time Emily dared to step onto a stage was not in a grand hall, but in a small community recital. The town had organized a modest evening where locals could share poems, songs, or any hidden talents. It was meant to be casual. Nothing serious, but for Emily it felt like stepping into another universe. Her hands shook as she signed her name on the list of performers, her stomach tight with fear. She had never played in front of strangers before, never tested her music outside the safety of empty walls. Part of her wanted to walk away, to pretend she had never even thought of doing this. But another part whispered that this was the chance she had been waiting for. A chance to see if her music could touch even one person. When her name was called, her legs felt heavy, as though the floor itself tried to hold her back. She walked slowly to the piano set at the front of the hall. Her eyes flickered across the audience. Small groups of families, elderly couples, children whispering to each other. No one knew who she was, no one cared to them. She was just another performer on a quiet evening. But to her, this was the moment her dream was finally stepping into the light. She sat down, her back straight, her breath uneven. Her fingers hovered over the keys but refused to move. In her mind she could still hear the laughter from the diner, the cruel smirk of Mr. Harlan, the teasing of her co-workers. What if she failed? What if they laughed again? What if every wrong note proved them right? Her heart pounded so loudly it seemed louder than the chatter of the crowd. But then she remembered the nights in the empty hall, the sound of her own music filling the silence. She remembered the feeling of freedom, of belonging when the piano spoke for her. With a trembling breath, she let her fingers fall. The first notes stumbled, uneven, nervous, her hands shook, and she nearly lost her place. For a moment, panic rushed through her. But instead of stopping, she pressed forward. One note after another, wrong ones mixed with right ones, until slowly the melody began to take shape. Her eyes closed, shutting out the people, shutting out the fear. She focused only on the sound, letting the music carry her where her courage could not. Something began to change. The audience grew quiet, the whispers faded. Though her playing was imperfect, though her hands were not polished like a trained pianist's, there was truth in the way she played. It was not the sound of luxury or training, but the sound of someone who had fought for every note. Every rise and fall of the melody carried her struggle, her hope, her belief that she was more than what the world saw, and people listened, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. When the piece ended, Emily's hands lingered on the keys. For a moment there was only silence, the kind that makes a heart stop. Then came applause, gentle at first, then stronger. It wasn't the roar of a stadium, but to Emily it was everything. Her chest filled with warmth. Her eyes stung with tears. She quickly blinked away. She stood, bowed her head slightly, and walked off the stage with trembling hands. Her legs felt weak, but her heart felt stronger than ever before. Backstage, she leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Yes, she had made mistakes. Yes, her playing was far from polished. But none of that mattered. The people had clapped. They had listened. They had seen her for the first time in her life. Her music had reached beyond herself, and that was enough. She carried that moment home with her. As she walked through the streets, the night felt different, brighter somehow. The doubt still whispered, reminding her she was only a waitress, reminding her of the millionaire's cruel laugh. But now she had something stronger to hold on to. She had proof, however small, that her dream was not empty. If strangers could listen and applaud, then maybe the world could too. Maybe she really could become the pianist she imagined in her dreams. When she sat at the old piano the next night, her fingers felt lighter. The music flowed easier, her confidence carrying her through the mistakes. Every note seemed to echo with the memory of that applause. It became her fuel, her reminder that even the smallest victories mattered. And though she knew the road ahead was long, though she knew more doubt and laughter would come, she also knew something had changed. She was no longer just practicing for herself. She was practicing for the world that had finally, even if only for a moment, listened. Emily didn't tell anyone at the diner what happened. She didn't need to. Her co-workers would not have understood. Mr. Harlan would not have cared. But deep inside, she held the memory close. The sound of clapping hands, the sight of faces turned toward her. It was her secret victory, her hidden flame, and no amount of doubt could take it away. After the recital, Emily carried the sound of applause in her heart, but life did not suddenly change. Each morning she still tied her apron, carried trays, and listened to the same impatient voices calling for coffee. The glow of her small victory followed her, yet reality reminded her that dreams were expensive. She wanted lessons, real lessons from a teacher who could guide her, but lessons cost money she did not have, so she kept saving coins and tips, tucking them into a small jar at home, a jar that filled so slowly it made her stomach ache with worry. There were nights when exhaustion nearly broke her. She would leave the diner with sore feet and aching shoulders, her hands red from carrying heavy plates. Her body begged for rest, but her heart begged for the piano. Some nights she gave in to the tiredness, collapsing into bed before even changing her clothes. Other nights she pushed herself forward, whispering, "Just one more hour, just one more song," as she unlocked the door to the dusty hall. Inside, the piano waited, its keys cold under her fingertips. She played until her arms trembled, until her head nodded with sleep. The harder she pushed, the clearer her dream became. But so did the weight of the sacrifice. People around her noticed nothing. Her co-workers laughed at the idea of her saving for lessons, telling her the money could be better spent on clothes, food, or rest. "You're wasting your nights," one said. "No one will ever take you seriously." Even friends told her to be practical, to stop chasing what they called a childish fantasy. Every word was like a stone placed on her back, heavy and unkind, but she carried them, turned their doubt into fuel, and kept walking toward the piano. At times, even the piano seemed to test her. The old instrument was far from perfect. Several keys stuck. The pedals creaked, and sometimes the sound went sour. There were evenings when she grew so frustrated she slammed the lid shut and walked away in tears. But something always pulled her back. She reminded herself that if she could learn on this broken piano, she could play on any piano. The imperfections became part of her training, shaping her resilience, sharpening her patience. Her hands, once soft, began to change. Blisters formed on her fingertips, the muscles in her arms grew sore. She often wrapped her fingers in cloth before playing. Pushing through the pain, when she looked at her hands, she no longer saw just a waitress's hands. She saw the hands of someone becoming stronger, hands that were slowly learning to speak a new language. It hurt, yes, but the pain was proof that she was building something. Still, doubts often returned at night. There were evenings when she stared at the jar of coins and wondered if she would ever save enough. She imagined the years passing by, herself still serving coffee, her music unheard. She thought of Mr. Harlan's cruel smirk, of her co-workers' laughter, and for a moment she believed them. She wondered if she was chasing a shadow, a dream too far from her reach. But then she would place her hands on the piano and play, and the sound would remind her why she could not stop. The piano never laughed, never doubted. It only responded to her effort, and that was enough to keep her going. The seasons changed, and Emily's routine became a rhythm of its own. Work at the diner, practice at night, save every coin, repeat. There was little joy in her days, but there was purpose. She began to notice her progress, the way her fingers flowed more easily, the way melodies that once felt impossible now came alive under her touch. It gave her hope, a quiet confidence that grew slowly, like a seed pushing through the dirt. Sometimes she played so passionately that she forgot her exhaustion. Her body disappeared into the music, and when she finished, she would realize hours had passed. Other times she broke down in frustration, slamming her fist against the piano because the sound didn't match what she heard in her head. Tears often fell onto the keys, mixing with the dust, yet even in those moments, she could not walk away for long. The piano was her battle, but it was also her refuge. The world outside remained unchanged. To everyone else, she was still just Emily, the waitress. But inside, she was becoming something they could not see. She was shaping herself into an artist, piece by piece, through pain, struggle, and persistence. And though no one applauded her late at night, though no one saw the sweat and tears, she felt a quiet certainty. This was not wasted effort. This was the foundation of something greater. One night, after hours of practice, she closed her eyes and realized something powerful. She had survived every doubt, every laugh, every sore hand and sleepless night, and she was still here, still playing. That meant something. It meant she was stronger than she thought. It meant that no matter how many obstacles appeared, she could face them, and as she leaned against the piano, her chest rising and falling with tired breaths, she whispered to herself, "I will not stop." The trials behind closed doors were harder than anyone could imagine, but those struggles, those lonely nights, were shaping her into the kind of musician who would one day silence every doubt. For now, the world saw only a tired waitress, but behind the curtain of exhaustion, a pianist was being born. The town announced a charity gala, a grand event where the wealthy gathered to show their support, and where local talents were sometimes invited to perform. The hall was decorated with golden lights, tables dressed in white cloth, and people wearing their finest clothes. It was the kind of place Emily had never belonged to, a place where her simple dress and nervous steps felt out of place. Yet this time she had been given a chance to sit at the piano before the most important people in town. Among them was Mr. Harlan, the very millionaire who had once mocked her dream, his presence making her heart beat faster than the sound of any note. When she first heard about the invitation, Emily had nearly refused. Fear clawed at her chest, whispering that she was not ready, that this stage was too big, that her mistakes would be louder than her music. But another voice, quiet yet strong, told her this was the test she could not run from. This was the night where her music would step out of the shadows. And so, with trembling determination, she agreed. On the evening of the gala, she stood backstage, her hands cold, her breath uneven. From behind the curtain she could see the glittering crowd, their laughter echoing like bells, their eyes bright with pride and expectation. Waiters moved gracefully between tables, offering drinks, while chandeliers sparkled above like captured stars. Emily's heart raced, her thoughts swirling. What if she failed? What if the piano betrayed her? What if Mr. Harlan laughed again? She pressed her hands together tightly, whispering to herself, "You've worked for this, you've earned this." "Don't run now," her name was announced, and her feet felt heavy as stone. Every step toward the stage felt endless. Every gaze from the crowd, a weight pressing down on her shoulders. She sat at the piano, the polished wood shining under the lights, so different from the scratched and battered instrument she practiced on. For a moment she froze, staring at her reflection in the glossy surface of the keys. The silence was unbearable, the room waiting, the air thick with expectation. At the front, Mr. Harlan leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, his lips curved into that familiar smirk. He had not forgotten the waitress who dreamed of music, and now he was ready to see her fail. To him, this performance was nothing but a foolish attempt, a reminder that some people should never step beyond their place. His eyes met hers briefly, and though he said nothing, his look alone was enough to make her chest tighten with fear. Emily closed her eyes, blocking him out, blocking them all out. She thought of the nights spent in the empty hall, the blisters on her fingers, the tears that had fallen on the dusty keys. She thought of the small applause at the recital, the proof that her music could reach hearts. And with one deep breath, she let her fingers fall onto the keys. The first notes trembled, soft and uncertain. She felt her hands shaking, her stomach twisting. But then she remembered why she was here. Not to prove herself to the millionaire, not to silence the whispers of her coworkers, but to share the truth inside her. Her music was her voice, and she would let it speak. Slowly the melody began to flow, each note carrying a piece of her struggle, her hope, her fire. The crowd grew quiet, their chatter fading as the sound filled the hall. At first they listened politely, but soon the room shifted, leaning forward, eyes fixed on the girl at the piano. Emily's fear melted away, replaced by something stronger. Her fingers danced with confidence, moving across the keys with a grace born not of privilege, but of persistence. The music rose and fell, like waves crashing and retreating, telling a story without words. For Emily, it was as if time stopped. She was no longer in the gala hall, no longer a waitress before the wealthy. She was back in the dusty community center, alone but free. Her music carried her there, and through that freedom, the crowd felt the raw honesty of her song. When the final note rang out, the silence that followed was deep. Then, like a spark catching fire, applause filled the room. His arms were no longer crossed, his eyes fixed on her with disbelief. He had expected failure, but instead, he had witnessed mastery, not perfection, but something more powerful, the undeniable proof of her will, her courage, her truth. For the first time, he looked at her not as a waitress, but as someone who had achieved what he thought impossible. Emily stepped off the stage, her heart racing, her spirit soaring. She knew this was not the end, but the beginning. The gala had been her test, and she had faced it with all she had. The girl who had once been mocked in whispers, who had once played to empty walls, had now filled a room with music and silenced every doubt. And though the world might still call her a waitress tomorrow, she knew she was something more. She had proven it not just to them, but to herself. Emily sat at the piano with her hands resting lightly on the keys, her heart beating so fast she thought the entire room could hear it. The bright lights above the stage blurred her vision, and the silence in the hall felt heavy, pressing on her shoulders like a weight she could not escape. For a moment she thought of running, standing up and leaving before she embarrassed herself. But then she closed her eyes and remembered every night she had spent in the empty community hall, the dust, the broken keys, the blisters, the tears. She remembered the laughter of her coworkers, the cruel smirk of Mr. Harlan, the doubt that had tried to chain her, and suddenly her fear became fuel. Her fingers pressed down, and the first note rang through the room, soft but alive. The music began slowly, like a whisper testing its strength. Each note carried the weight of her struggle, shaky at first, then steadier. The melody rose like a voice learning to speak, learning to claim its place in the world. Emily's body swayed with the rhythm, her eyes still closed, her lips parting as if she were breathing the music itself. And then it grew stronger, her fingers flying across the keys with a speed and grace that no one in the room had expected. The sound filled the hall, rising and falling like waves crashing against the shore. It was not polished like the performance of a trained professional, but it was powerful, it was raw, it was real. It carried a story. Every high note shouted of her hope. Every low note whispered of her pain. Her music spoke of long nights after exhausting shifts, of coins saved in jars, of loneliness turned into courage. And the crowd felt it, even if they didn't understand it with words. They leaned forward, their laughter and whispers forgotten. Their eyes locked on the girl they had once overlooked. Mr. Harlan sat frozen in his chair. The smirk that had once curled his lips was gone, replaced by something he could not name. He had expected to see a foolish attempt, a girl stumbling through a dream too big for her hands. Instead, he was witnessing a fire, a storm of sound that silenced the doubts he had carried. Each note seemed to strike him directly, shattering the wall of arrogance he had built. For the first time, he saw her not as a waitress but as an artist. Emily felt none of this as she played. She was no longer aware of the wealthy crowd, the chandeliers, the expensive suits and dresses. She was not in the gala hall at all. She was back in the quiet hall where no one clapped, where the piano was her only friend. Her fingers moved as if guided by something beyond her, something deeper. The music flowed through her, not from her, and she let it carry her higher and higher. When she reached the final section, the melody soared. Her hands moved faster, her body leaning into the sound as if she were pouring her soul into the keys. The notes rang sharp and bright, echoing off the walls, filling every corner of the hall. The audience held its breath, caught in the grip of her passion. And then, with one final strike, the music ended, leaving a silence so heavy it felt like the air had disappeared. Emily's hands hovered over the keys. Trembling, her chest rose and fell quickly, sweat shining on her forehead. For a moment, she thought she had failed because no one moved. No one clapped, no one spoke, but then it began. Soft at first, a single pair of hands clapping, then another, then more. In seconds, the hall erupted in thunderous applause, the sound rolling over her like a wave. The crowd rose to their feet, their faces glowing with awe, their voices cheering. It was louder, stronger, and more real than anything she had ever imagined. Emily stood slowly, her knees weak, her eyes stinging with tears she fought to hold back. She bowed her head, her heart racing with disbelief. This was not the dusty hall, this was not a lonely dream. This was real. She had done it, she had played, and they had listened. Truly listened. Mr. Harlan did not clap at first. His hands frozen on the table, his eyes wide, but as the applause grew, he too lifted his hands slowly, almost unwillingly, and began to clap. It was not out of pity, not out of politeness, but out of a respect he had never expected to feel. The same man who once dismissed her now sat humbled, forced to see the truth of her talent. His smirk would never return, because Emily had destroyed it with her music. As Emily left the stage, the applause still echoing behind her, she felt lighter than she had ever felt before. She had not just played the piano. She had poured her life into it, and in return, the world had finally seen her. Every sacrifice, every tear, every long night had led to this moment. She had mastered not only the music but herself, and though her hands still trembled, it was no longer from fear but from victory. That night, Emily walked home not as the girl who served coffee, not as the waitress mocked by a millionaire. She walked home as the pianist who had silenced a room. Her dream was no longer hidden in the shadows, it was alive, shining, unstoppable. When the music ended and the applause faded into memory, Emily's life no longer felt the same. She returned to the diner the next morning, tying her apron just as she always did, moving between tables with her polite smile. But something inside her had shifted. Her steps were lighter. Her heart carried a glow that no long shift or rude customer could dim. She had faced the storm of doubt and walked out stronger. And though her uniform looked the same, she no longer felt invisible for the first time. She believed that the world had seen her as more than a waitress. They had seen her as Emily, the pianist. The people in town began to whisper about her performance at the gala. Some said they had never expected such passion from a girl who served coffee. Others admitted they were wrong to doubt her. Even those who had laughed before now spoke of her with respect. The small recital had given her a spark, but the gala had lit a fire. Her music was no longer a secret hidden in a dusty hall. It was alive in the memory of everyone who had heard her play. Mr. Harlan, the millionaire who once mocked her, could not escape the truth of what he had witnessed. He came to the diner days later, sitting in his usual corner booth, but his eyes were different. No longer cold, no longer dismissive. When Emily poured his coffee, he cleared his throat and said quietly, "You played well." The words were simple, almost reluctant. But Emily understood the weight they carried. It was not just a compliment. It was an admission that he had been wrong. And for Emily, that moment mattered as much as the applause. She had not only silenced his doubt, she had transformed it. But the greatest change was not in others, it was in herself. She no longer practiced just to prove them wrong. She practiced because the music was who she was. She realized that every struggle, every night of pain and exhaustion, had shaped her into more than a musician. It had shaped her into someone who could not be broken by doubt. She understood now that success was not measured only in applause, but in persistence, in the courage to keep playing when no one was listening. Her music had taught her patience, resilience, and belief. It had taught her that greatness could be born from small places, from simple lives if only the heart was strong enough. In the months that followed, Emily continued to play. She performed at small events, then larger ones, her name slowly spreading beyond the town. She was still a waitress, but she was also something more. Every time she sat at a piano, she remembered the girl who once practiced alone in the dusty hall. She carried that girl with her, never forgetting where she had begun, never forgetting the laughter, the doubts, the long nights of silence. Those struggles were not her weakness. They were her strength. Her co-workers, who had once teased her, now watched with quiet pride. Some even asked her to play for them, sitting in the empty diner after closing, listening as her music filled the air. And though the audience was small, Emily played with the same passion she had given at the gala. Because every person who listened mattered. Every heart touched by her music made the journey worthwhile. In her quiet moments, Emily often reflected on the path she had walked. She thought of the jar of coins, the tired hands. The nights when she nearly gave up, she thought of the first recital. The shaky notes, the nervous bow, she thought of Mr. Harlan's smirk and how it had fueled her fire. And most of all, she thought of the music itself, how it had never abandoned her, how it had waited patiently for her to trust it. The piano had been her companion through loneliness, and now it was her voice to the world. Emily's story became more than her own. It became a story for others who were told they could not, who were laughed at for dreaming. She wanted them to see that greatness was not locked behind wealth or privilege. It was hidden in persistence, in the willingness to keep moving forward even when the world turned its back. Her life stood as proof that even a waitress with tired hands could master something beautiful. She became a reminder that dreams, no matter how small they seemed, could grow strong if given enough courage. Years later, when people remembered Emily, they did not speak of the girl who carried trays. They spoke of the woman who carried music, who turned doubt into melody, who filled rooms with sound so powerful it silenced even the harshest critics. Her legacy was not only in the notes she played, but in the lesson her journey carried, that no dream was too small, no person too invisible, no beginning too humble. She had shown them all that what matters most is not where you start, but how much heart you put into the journey. And so Emily continued to play, her fingers dancing across keys, her heart alive with music. Every performance was a story, every note a reminder of where she had been and where she was going. She no longer needed the world's approval to know her worth. She had already proven it to them, to Mr. Harlan, and most of all to herself. The waitress had become a pianist. The doubted girl had become a master, and her music, born from struggle and persistence, would never be forgotten.